do have the bike show on it.
Yeah, big mob.
You know, Bobby Kennedy broke up the mob in Cincinnati.
Yep.
You had mentioned on your last tour that you were a Mason.
Yes.
In Millionaires Row, you know, all the doctors that were on there, were they also
I know that.
Masons?
Many of them, yes. Okay, let us cross here, the crosswalk, and then head up to the parking lot that's just the other side of this, for the most part, ever parked.
Yeah.
There were certainly many times.
One tour we did. Damn, what was it? We did an hour. And we cared. It was a big city. No, I think it was Seattle.
Just very quickly, one of the names we're going to mention a little bit here, but we talk more about it on the Hillgrove tour. And one of the big names in Miamisburg was Henry Grovey. Where was the first bank in Miamisburg? Right here. Started in about 1868, somewhere around there. Later, it became the First National Bank of Miamisburg. It's right here. Okay, so there's our first. The other stops actually have buildings, but let me show you some more stuff. Okay, another interesting thing, and we get to see it from this side of the building. This is the back of the Quinter block, and you see that outbuilding that's on the back of that building right there. The little addition onto the two-story addition there.
Oh, the black, where the patio thing
Above the dumpster there, where the
Oh,
building
the
is with the little roof on it.
Oh.
That, my friends, is a two-story outhouse.
Oh.
That's where the two-story outhouse is. It's about the only one I've ever heard of. And I have to wonder that the second floor apartments were more expensive than the first floor apartments, but I don't know that for sure. Okay, we've got a research project in progress. I think it's this building right here, or maybe it was this building. That was the workshop of a man named Vincent Apple, and he invented a lot of things, including, again, we're going to get all this verified and everything, including the electric starter for vehicles. The story goes that, what was it, Kettering, who was working at GM, came down and said, I can either buy you out or I can keep you in port for years. And that's how GM got the electric starter, which they put in the Cadillacs, I believe, back in the 1920s. But it was actually invented here in Miamisburg. He invented several other things. We're going to be working a lot more on focusing attention on him.
So Kettering did not invent the starter.
I'm from Miamisburg, so I'm biased. We're going to get some documentation on this. But as they say, the way I heard it was. All right, let's move on. This is the monument to Little Turtle. This area was settled obviously by native people, and at one time, this is going to be the loud part of the tour. At one time, there was a mound that went around this part of town. It was about 6 feet tall and surrounded this area. This is obviously before the settlers got here. Then once the settlers got here, they found that the ground was really rich and they could grow tobacco, which was a big money crop back then. So they dug into the mound, found the clay that was in the mound, which of course is what a lot of the soil is here, and they made a lot of the bricks for a lot of the early buildings. Now the first schoolhouse was, now the canal would have gone right through here, okay? Right on this side of the city building, which obviously hasn't been here that long. And then all these houses would have faced not only First Street, but also the canal. And there were businesses along here as well that were facing the canal, so they could just load their products onto the boats and send them down to Cincinnati or up to Toledo. So this area was, needless to say, severely damaged during the 1913 flood, where there would have been about 10 to 12 feet of water rushing through here from Dayton. This area has changed quite a bit over the years. But the first school was here, the first cemetery was here. Because you always put your cemetery on the outskirts of town. So as the town expanded, this is when they took it out to what's now Library Park or Veterans Memorial Park. And then once the city moved out that far, then that's when they moved the deceased again, or at least their headstones. There may still be some people here, but that's when they moved out the Hillgrove Cemetery, starting in the 1860s. So, and the building that was here, that was the schoolhouse for the Lutherans and the German Reformed Church, we'll talk about on the 2nd Street tour, because it's just around the corner on 2nd Street. It was moved several times, at least twice.
Why did they build mounds?
The Indians?
Yeah.
Well, the different reason. One, it was probably for security. The mound that's at the top of the hill on Mound Avenue is great visibility around the area. When it was excavated, they didn't find any, like a King Tut kind of a thing or anything like that. It was just a lot of refuse and debris and things like that.
I see.
So unfortunately, we didn't have anything more dramatic. But I mean, you get a great view from the top of the mound. That could have been a reason. It could have been ceremonial.
Yeah.
A number of reasons. Like, you know, some of the mounds are in animal shapes and things like that. They didn't leave any plans. They didn't leave any documentation that anyone's found. So whatever they did it really well, but they didn't explain it. Let us move further north. This was the home of Harry Kaufman. The Kaufmans had a buggy company, and I'll show you here in a block or two about what's going on. Didn't count on the dog. At least it's not a motorcycle. All right. The Kaufmans took over. They bought out the Bookwalter Carriage and Wheel Company because that's how people got around back then. And the Kaufmans built buggies that were nationally and internationally known. They displayed some of their buggies at the 1893 Columbian World Exposition in Chicago. You know, the White City that you see on the documentary. This is one of the Kaufman homes. It's very convenient because his factory would have been just a couple of blocks to our north and west. So, and they had their business there. It was severely damaged in a fire. They moved moved up to Main Street, and then all of the area was pretty well wiped out by the flood. And by 1913, carriages were not quite as popular as they had been, since everyone was driving vehicles, and vehicles with air rubber tires instead of carriage wheels like the cars that we built here in Miamisburg. So that business did not survive. But that's a little bit ahead of the tour. Any questions about the Kaufman so far?
Was this underwater during the flood?
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
So that top it all survived
Somehow. You know, if it fell off, I mean, you could put it back on. I mean, we have a picture in the Historical Society looking from the old firehouse is right there on the corner, and there's a picture taken kind of in front of that old firehouse looking down 2nd Street, and the whole awning in front of what became Fox Motors was in the street. And they were also dirt streets, so it was already messy, and then it was soggy and messy and full of debris. So, yeah, if you could find it, I guess you could put it back on your house.
It looks original to
Sometimes you get lucky. And again, depending on how the debris came through, it may not have, has much force on the front of the house. It could have taken off part of the back of the house. You know, it's unpredictable. All right, so we want to go up to the traffic light. Buggy Company, the big factory that you can see in the old lithographs in Miamisburg, was over here, and then they all used to go to Lee's Famous Recipe for lunch. Or so they say. But see, all that area would have been down further by the river, so there was more land to have a big factory. When the canal, I keep saying the canal, when the levee was put in, all that geography was changed. But by then they'd had the big fire, and no one was buying carriages anyway. So, all right, now, this was a building that was originally owned by Daniel Bookwalter, which is one of the big names in Miamisburg. And then later on, it was owned by, what was his first name? I'm on the wrong page. No wonder I can't find it. William Niebel. Now, he had a grocery store here back in the days when you had these little corner grocery stores. And he was the manager of the original Kroger store, which was further down on Main Street next to where Taste of Wine is in the donut shop. That was where the original Kroger was. Now obviously it's moved several times, and one of the people who likes to go on our tours was retired from Kroger, and we used to quiz everybody on how many different Kroger locations we've had in town. 5. 6 if you include Austin Landing. All right, so Niebel had this building. Before then, it was part of the Bookwalter Carriage and Wheel Company, whether it was a display building or whatever. But the company that was over there next to the river was bought out by the Kaufmans. That's where they built a lot of their carriages. And then now we're going to talk about some of their beautiful homes. And it looks like we can cross the street now. They would know, right? But it wasn't going around. Then it was a bakery. Smaller Miamisburg parks. If you want to look at it, you have to go in by twos because there isn't room for everybody. But the canal would have come right through here because it came kind of diagonally down through this part of town and then down to kind of parallel on First Street and then all the way out of town, down Old 25. So, there was an argument in the Historical Society whether or not they had keel boats on the canal or if they just had flat boats. I believe they had both, but I guarantee that somebody would not have put a keel boat into the canal until they knew they were going to be able to navigate it. They wouldn't have just, stuck it in there without knowing that they could float the thing. So, kind of a neat little park.
What is the keel boat? I'm not familiar with it.
What is a keel boat? It's a boat that has a keel. I think it's the thing where you're steering it from the back. Is that right? Any sailors in here? Anyone from the Navy?
Give me
Coast Guard?
Tell me here just a second.
You look like you know, sir.
Keelboats got their name from the keel, a 4-inch square timber that extended along the bottom of the vessel from bow to stern. The keel stabilized a heavy boat in dangerous river currents. Keelboats were from 45 to 75 feet long and 7 to 9 feet wide.
Yeah, like I said.
Thank you, Google.
Okay, now the other kind of boat obviously was a flat boat. So we had 2 different kinds of boats in here. And those were drug along by animals that would go along the towpath. Okay. Our first house that we're going to talk about is just here. This is why we do them in the morning. George Grove's house from 1872. Now, again, we mentioned Henry Grovey because he was in business with Grove along with Emanuel Schultz. And as we were walking up First Street, if you happen to look on Ferry Street where that car lot gas station is there, back before 1920, that was where Emanuel Schultz's house was. And it was one of those beautiful 3-story homes with the nice mansard roof and everything. His son-in-law moved into the house after he died. And Emanuel Schultz lived to be about 92 years old. and he was in the tobacco business. So I guess, well, there was no Surgeon General back then. So anyway, his son-in-law moved into that house, and then they sold it to a gas station, and ever since then it was a gas station since about the 1920s. So Schultz was there. Groby's house was over on Central Avenue, and then Grove was here. A lot of our city fathers were in business with one another. They were on each other's boards. They invested in companies together. We had a big twine and cordage business here in town. We made carriage wheels, then we made carriages, then we made some unbelievably unsuccessful automobiles. One of which we have in the History Center at the Historical Society on 5th Street. It is a 1908, 1909, 1907, somewhere in there, Advance Auto. It was, I don't think they sold any of them. They marketed them and didn't sell anything, because by then Ford, GM, or Chrysler, and all the Chevrolet, all those cars were making rubber wheel cars, and we could never get our cars going. So spectacularly unsuccessful. But we do have, I believe it's the only Advance Auto that still runs. But we're not going to risk taking it out on the street, even in a parade.
Can't get parts, huh?
Yeah, you know, we go over here to Advance, and you know, I need something for a 1908 Advance, and they're like, what does that even mean, you know? All right, so George Grove, one of our city founders. Now, you can see behind here, there were some more buildings on the property. Now they're on Buckeye Street, as you can see from the little lithograph here. All right, across the street is another one of the Kaufmans. This was James Kaufman's house. This house was for sale several years ago. I actually got to go through here. You see that it's still got the stained glass upstairs. They're marble sinks, you know, with nice designs, enamel in the sink. That nice porch. Behind is a big carriage house. Not surprising for someone who's in the carriage business. He wasn't ever the president. He was more the secretary and treasurer. He was one of the younger brothers. But he and his wife Anna lived here. His first wife died 2 weeks after giving birth to their first son, who later became an admiral in the United States Navy.
Wow.
And the USS Kaufman is named after him. So James Kaufman's son was a Navy man. Kaufman himself was the musical director at the Methodist Episcopal Church, which is now the Masonic Temple, and then they moved over to 5th Street to Parkview Church. So that's where he was. His wife was the organist. She was classically trained. So this is their home. They had 2 more children after the first one that they raised, and they all grew up here. Any questions about anything so far? I'm not hearing any questions. Let's move on.
Oh, here, look at, there's another library here.
Gosh, I can.
Their boxes look pretty good.
You know what? Those little details just make it, we can put music in it. Makes us all look really good. Okay, this was the home of Jacob Kaufman, who was James and William's father. Again, born in 1830, died in 1903. Had a nice long life.
We timed it well.
Yeah. Just remember, when the train goes through, that's a sign of progress in our community, right? Okay, he bought the company from Daniel Bookwalter, and then turned it into the Kaufman Company. And then we'll talk about Enterprise a little bit. He was also invested in that. What they would do at Kaufman is they would provide the chassis for the Enterprise carriages that were built later. So, and in addition, I mean, he was involved in a number of other businesses that, as I said, they were all cross-invested in one another. Any questions about yet another Kaufman? Okay, let's go up the street to 309. And in 1888, it was bought by Jerome Wirtz. who was born clear out in Jefferson Township, so that's out that direction. And he was a tinsmith, and then he served in the Civil War, and then he started a hardware store after he was a farmer with another, if you're in Miamisburg for any amount of time, you'll hear the name Beekler quite a bit. So he was with Beekler and Wertz, had a hardware store here downtown. And then after that, he sold out and went back to farming. So interesting. Now, as it says here in the book, in its day, at his store, which was on South Main Street, it was the only place locally where you could buy dynamite. Interesting story, real quick, about the flood. I heard Jay mentioning it earlier. All the debris came down from Dayton, and there were trillions, capital T, trillions of gallons of water, as well as all that junk that came down the river. The canals backed up all down through here, and the Big Four Railroad had built a big embankment for the railroad bridge that went across as that railroad went south. That created kind of a funnel. All that debris backed up the water and flushed it back into the town again. The story is that in the midst of all the rain and flooding and everything, some local guys got in their Model T and tried to get up Centerville Pike, which is 725, to go over to Centerville to buy dynamite because they were going to blow the bridge so that all that debris would go down the bridge. I don't think they made it and then made it back in time because it was raining pretty hard and there was a lot of water through here. So that would have been well, first of all, riding in a bouncy Model T with a box of dynamite doesn't sound like a very good idea. But that idea was vetoed. But there was talk of doing that in the heat of the moment. So you could buy dynamite from Jacob Wertz and Beekler downtown in Miamisburg at one time. Let's move on. This was William J. Kaufman's home. Now, one of the reasons why we did not make more cars in Miamisburg is because when Enterprise started, William Kaufman here, they started experimenting with making vehicles, motorized vehicles in Miamisburg. His son was out driving in Dayton in one of those test vehicles, probably the only one they made, and says he was foggy, he might have been out with a couple of friends, and he drove that car off of the 5th Street Bridge in downtown Dayton, crashed into the levee and was killed. He was actually, it says here, he was pinned in his seat by the steering column. This is before steering columns broke away like they do now. So, and his father said, that's it, we're not making any more cars. So that was the end of that automobile business. But all of the Kaufmans, you know, many of them trained in other places, started other businesses, and then brought it back here to Miamisburg. So it was a very big business at the time. And this is where William J. lived.
Okay, question.
Yes.
What is that, the carriage house or something back there? That other building, do you see?
Yeah, could be. Because, you know, again, you want to bring your, just like if you own a car dealership now, you're going to bring the latest model back to your house, right? Yeah. Now, in the case of William Gamble, who lived where his house is the Gebhard Schmidt Funeral Home on 5th Street, 5th and Linden. He had a big carriage house because he was a well-known horseman in the area, and he used to get a new horse and parade it around through town, and they would write about it in the newspaper. So, yeah, they all had the big carriage house so they could house their animals and their vehicles. Okay, so Benjamin Bookwalter bought this house and he added several rooms. Now it's 5 families, but originally this was his home. It has about 20 rooms to it. He grew up in Miamisburg, left town for many years. After the Civil War, came back, joined his brother's business, and they named it the Bookwalter Brothers. Clever. So they made carriage wheels, and then when Kaufman bought the business, then he blah, 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 as we said many times. Now, across the railroad, just across the railroad to the left, is where the Enterprise Carriage Company used to be. And the only thing left is the foundation, maybe part of the building, but there was a huge fire there in the 60s, and then the building was eventually torn down completely in the 70s. But there was the carriage company there, and then after that, the Wright brothers airplane company was there. They built airplane parts. Specifically, they built the propellers out of white oak, which is one of the reasons why you don't find any white oak anywhere close to Miamisburg, because they bought up all the trees from the local farmers and made propellers out of them. Because you need a strong wood, because you don't want to be up in the air and find out that you made the propeller out of the wrong thing, especially in one of those balsa wood and canvas airplanes that they were flying at the time. Now, again, take some time and drive through Miamisburg. On the other side is that strange little narrow building, just a half a block from here. That was the Acme Folding Boat Company. Now, you're probably thinking, if you've never heard of the Acme Boat Company before, why in the world would you build a folding boat? But I thought it was a joke, and I waited for the punchline. We really built folding boats here in Miamisburg, and they were internationally known. They were sold in the Montgomery Ward catalog. They were a big deal. And William Gamble, who had the big home on Linden Avenue, his son, William Jr., clever, and Charles Allen's son, David, were building folding boats. Now the frame folded, and then it had a canvas waterproof cover on it. So the boat would not fold while you're in the water. Okay? So they were watertight.
So the new thing is now the blow-up boats.
Yes.
They took the idea and ran.
Give them a chance and they would have come up with that. So the boats were built here, and then they built wooden speedboats and things like that until the 1960s when that business went out, but the building is still there. So that was another one of our big businesses in town. In addition to carriages, we made folding boats. And then we had a lot of bars.
Do something with it.
Right. Whatever.
When you had to test somebody, you just found a drunk person and let them test it.
There you go. Now, if we had enough folding boats, I have suggested to the Historical Society that we ought to have a folding boat regatta in the Miami River. But unfortunately, we only have, I think, 1 or 2 boats, not quite enough for, and some of them are original, so we don't want to have anything historical floating in the
Somebody
river.
needs to replicate them.
Exactly. I brought that up. A little bit more work than it needs. We have all the templates and everything, and the son of the last guy who owned that business is one of our volunteers at the Historical Society, and he has donated all the tools from the workshop as well as several boats. It's a pretty nice display over there where you can see, once you get over the fact that it's called a folding boat, and it's called Acme too, and we've all watched cartoons. So, yes.
That house there, on the windows, you see them hooks at the top and the bottom on the sides?
Yeah.
What are them for?
Probably for shutters.
Mm-hmm.
And they aren't like the shutters that you find on new homes. They were probably functional.
Yeah.
So you could actually open and close them,
Yeah,
yes.
it could be the thing sticking up and you just hook the, okay, thanks.
So how did Pearl correlate if Linden is the Millionaire Row?
This is the other Millionaire's Row.
This is okay. Was this pre or at the same time?
Pretty much the same time. I mean, I think this is, as I said, this is one of the earliest areas in town. And then some of the homes that we talk about on Millionaire's Row were the first one in that block, or the first one that far across the railroad track, so that would have been the outskirts of town. Even where Treon's house was at the corner of 3rd Street, just across the street to the west of him was just 10,000 acres of cow pasture. So obviously the city has grown since then. We've been a city since the 1930s, but back then it was one of thousands of small communities in America. Except we had folding boats and carriages. The best tour group of the entire 4th Street area. We're going to add this building to it. This is the United Brethren Church, which, as you can see, was erected in 1882. One interesting thing about this church is that the people who wanted to build a church here went door to door asking for donations. So people would throw in, you know, a couple cents or whatever. And so this church has been here, you know, since the 1880s. Now the United Brethren, if you know anything about church history, and especially the Protestant church, you know, it started out with Martin Luther and his group, and now there are 5,000 denominations. The United Brethren went in with the Methodist Church and became the United Methodist Church back in the 60s. So this was a precursor of part of the Methodist Church.
Did it take like years? It says from 1882 to 1914. Did it take I don't know, all that time to build this church?
No, that's how long they were here as the United Brethren.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So we are going to work out, as soon as I can get them all to answer the phone, we are going to work out a historic church tour, which will be kind of a self-guided thing, maybe with a little passport that you get stamped, and then we'll have some fabulous prize for you at the Historical Society. But we haven't got that off the ground yet, still working on it. Since we had so many of these great tours going on, it was kind of crazy to think about adding yet another one, but maybe next year. Great, yeah. Yeah, you can see here it was only 5 feet, so hardly a flood at all.
It was just enough to mop the floor.
Yeah. Just keep the door closed, it'll be fine.
That's funny. No, but the flood marker's funny. That's a lot.
Okay, Isaac Ryder was one of the German Reformed Church ministers who met at what is now Trinity Church, and that is the third church that has been on that property there at the corner of Linden Avenue. It was an original church, then it was torn down to be rebuilt in 1900, and then they added on the second, the northernmost section of it later on. Okay, so William Ryder's father was the minister of that church there, and as I said earlier, the building that was moved from 1st Street over to 2nd Street, that was the school, and it was Backwater Voodoo here just recently. One of the reasons, but not the only reason, that the Lutheran Church and the German Reformed Church did not meet in that building together is because the Lutherans served wine for communion and the German Reformed Church did not support any sort of alcohol at all. So that was one of the reasons why they split. There were other reasons, but that was a reason for that. Isaac complained in his diary that people on Saturday night were up singing and carousing in the ale houses, and he couldn't get sleep before his Sunday morning sermon. So again, as I said at the time the Door District was going in, it's part of our heritage to have people complaining that there's going to be a bunch of drunken people in Miamisburg. But as you can see, the Door District has gone in. All the businesses are doing well. They've all put in patios. So obviously, we're going to keep alcohol here in Miamisburg, but not in the Ryder house. Okay, now Isaac had this house for a little bit. He left it to his 3 children, William and his 2 sisters, Miriam and Eudora. And I don't know that this is the truth, but it seems like the German Reformed Church was kind of a fire and brimstone kind of a church, because none of his 3 children ever married. They lived in this house together for the rest of their lives. Now, William was the city solicitor for many years. In his 20s, he was elected to the Ohio House of Representatives, which would have been in the 1880s, around then. He was mayor of Miamisburg several times, as well as very active with the Masons, who at that time would have been meeting in the Oddfellows building. But then he was around when the Masons had the building in 1901, 1902, 1903, when they were renovating it to look like the Egyptian building that it is today. So his portrait is up in the Masonic Temple as well. As I said, he was mayor in 1909 when he wrote to the Carnegie Foundation to get money to put in the library. So he gets credit for that. However, any people here in the Monday Night Club? We have one person from the Monday Night Club. Have any of you heard of the Monday Night Club? Okay. In 1893, the school teachers in the area formed the Monday Night Club here in Miamisburg. Originally it was called the Shakespeare Club, and then I guess after they ran out of Shakespeare plays, they started reading other things, and they would write papers on certain topics and sit and discuss them and critique each other's work and that sort of thing. And they got tired of going out of town to find a good library, so they petitioned, and one of the things they were good at is writing letters as well as writing papers. So they petitioned the city and the Carnegie Foundation, and then William Ryder wrote the letter and actually got a response in 12 days, which is pretty amazing. But it's probably from the pressure from the Monday Night Club. So whatever the purpose is, July 1909, they laid the cornerstone. The building opened in 1910, and it was the city library until the 1970s when the building next door was opened. Happily, it's still there, and I'm also happy to say that as of this year, the Historical Society is taking that over.
Nice display.
Okay, one more time.
Yes.
As of this year, the Historical Society is taking it over. Best tour of the day, I swear. All right. And we are going to turn that into a veterans, first responders, fire and police memorial / museum / center. So when the Historical Society rings your phone and asks you for, just like our friends at the United Brethren, asked you for your donation, or if you'd like to volunteer there, we would certainly like to have your help, because we want to make that a veteran center that we can all be proud of. And we have all sorts of things that we can display that we just don't have room to display right now, as well as fire and police and first responders things that we don't even have in our possession yet, that the police department and fire department want to give to us to put in that area. So very excited about that. The architects right now are going through the building and writing up their designs, which they will have for us at the end of the summer, and then we will be able to start the fundraising and everything to get that started. It's going to be a pretty good sized project, but the city is with us. Well, happily, we're getting some more, circulation in that building, which hasn't been used that much in many years. So anyway, the building wouldn't even be there if it wasn't for William Ryder. Did you see how I brought all that right back around like that? Okay, as I said, the Big Four built the railroad that went through here. I think it was put in 1850s, give or take. And where the sign there on the building says Dental Depot, that was where the big Miamisburg sign used to hang, just like it is on all railroad depots in all small towns in America. That sign is now over the Historical Society, so we did get that. If you look here at the picture, you'll see there are people on the other side of the building standing right next to the tracks waiting for the train. So this is where you would catch the train. Now the next picture is interesting because the railroad had to hire 2 guys at each crossing to get up in that little tree house and look for the train to come and pull down the bar to block the street. Before the electric sensors and everything went in. So if you've been in the Dental Depot here, you'll see that the lobby here is still set up like a railroad depot. So you come up to the metal grate, to talk to the receptionist. It's pretty neat. So, and then people would stop on the railroad and they would come across the street and get a tattoo.
Can I ask you what?
I can't verify that part.
No, I was just gonna say.
What building is that over there? That big one.
That was the Crest Hotel at one time. And then on the first floor was the Ankeny drugstore, which is also a lunch counter. How many graduates do we have at Miamisburg High School? How many of you went to the Ankeny lunch counter? How many of you cut school to go to the Ankeny lunch counter? How many of you learned about truthfulness and citizenship? That was a popular hangout for the high school kids. They had, I guess, really good fountain drinks, and it's torn between, some people said the hot dogs were really good, some people said the hamburgers were really good, but the school was just over there and it was pretty easy to get over there for lunch. Whether or not you went back to class was, well, anyway.
What is it now? Is it just empty?
It is, but one of our Main Street business owners has bought that building and slowly, painfully slowly, redoing it. Maybe it'll be apartments, maybe it'll be another business. But we have the lunch counter from the Ankeny in the Historical Society. So you can come sit at the counter and have some snacks. But the counter is, it's got linoleum on it, it's pretty nice. Okay, any questions so far about train travel through here? Now, as I was saying, this is where the big bridge goes south of town, and then that's where the Big Four built their embankment that blocked the river. It's since been changed, so God forbid we should have another flood over the levee that we have now. Noah would float through if we had another flood in here now. But That has been redesigned so that it doesn't block up the river like it used to.
Can I ask a question?
Of
You
course.
said that the train went through, you built it in 1850s, you said?
Give or take, yeah.
Okay, but the canal was also going through.
Right.
Why didn't they stop the canal and just keep the train?
That's pretty much what happened.
Okay.
The canal, by the time of the 1913 flood, all up and down through Ohio, all the canals in Ohio were pretty much full of junk.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Which was part of the reason why the 1913 flood would have been so, to put it mildly, gross, is because all that stuff would have been washed up
I see.
out of the canal. As I've said, I don't have any big name relatives myself in Miamisburg. They were probably the drunken Irishmen who dug the canal and then got drunk and fell in it. So, you know.
Right. So really, the canal by late 1800s, it wasn't really being used.
No, it was kind of, you can imagine still water or water that doesn't flow very much.
Oh, I see. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And of course we had, horses and things, and
Right.
yes,
Okay.
it was a very aromatic town. Let me
Yes,
say it
very
that way.
much so.
All right. The house that used to be here was Newton Catro's house, who was the bank president. And the house was so beautiful that Terry put a whole bunch of pictures of it so you could see it from all different angles, because it was a very nice home. This is what, similar to what Emanuel Schultz's house would have looked like before it was torn down for the gas station. Now this house, the Catros were, again, cross-invested in a lot of different businesses. Newton's son Herb was a captain or colonel in the National Guard, and he was in charge of the troops that were patrolling through the city after the flood, because it was martial law after dark for many months. So the water didn't really come up here as far. We have a book at the Historical Society that was written by a lady named Ida Eck, and her husband was clerk and later president. He worked for the First National Bank for about 50 years, Charles, and he left for work on Tuesday and was trapped in the bank building that was over on Main Street on the second floor until they got him out after the floodwaters went down. And of course there's no cell phone service, there was no phone line or anything in the upstairs, so he was in kind of a bad way by the time he got out, because who knew how long it was going to take. But one of the things that Ida wrote in her letter was she ran into Newton Catro, who she would know because her husband worked for the bank, and he said, in the midst of the rain and the floodwater and everything, he said, well, I'm gonna go home and water my yard now. So even he had a sense of humor at that time. Now, his first son, well, his wife died about 1907. They had two sons, just like that. I can't remember the other son's name, but he went out west and got into mining and made a fortune. But then he died during the Spanish flu. His son died in World War I over in France. And then, so by the time Newton died in 1919, Herb was already moved off to New York City, where he was investing in the stock market and getting involved in 1920s Republican politics. So the house, it was owned by the church for a while, and it just kind of fell into disrepair. And by the time the government and the post office wanted to build a building, because the post office was over in the Oddfellows building or in the Gwinner block, they wanted an actual post office. So they bought this property, they tore down the Catro house, and in 1940, huge parade, the Masons were here to lay the cornerstone again. They actually got the 1793 trowel, the cement spreading thing that George Washington used for the Masonic ceremony in 1793, and it was used here for the cornerstone laying in 1940.
Nice.
That doesn't happen anymore. They have several replicas that they use, because the first one was getting scratched up because everybody wanted to borrow it. And when you borrowed it, you had to pay for the two guys from Alexandria, Virginia, to bring it here on the train, or later on in airplanes, to wherever you were, because they didn't just ship it to you, because you wouldn't have shipped it back. Okay, so the post office was here from 1940 until the new post office on Heineke was built. The remnant of the Catro mansion is the carriage house right here. Now that was where Catro kept his big carriages and his horses, and this sort of tower looking place there on the side was a big silo for water for the animals. Later, there was a business that was over on by the canal, and we'll talk about that here in a couple weeks on the 2nd Street tour. And that was the original location for Star City bottling. How many of you have tried Star City? There we go. Well, what was your favorite flavor?
Orange.
Orange. Everyone always has a different answer, but they answer like that. Star City Bottling was a soft drink company here. They moved to the carriage house, and this is where they had their business for over 40 years. They had several flavors, all were very popular. They were put out of business by the big soda companies, but I'm still crossing my fingers that someday we'll get the recipe and maybe we'll brew up a couple of batches of Star City. But again,
Will never happen.
you have to lay out a plan whether you can accomplish it or not. So I don't think it's ever going to happen, but wouldn't it be nice if we could have Star City again in Miamisburg? So anyhow, that's where that business was. Now, Lord knows, I think it's apartments or something. Well, there's kids stuff on the 2nd floor. Let's hope it's apartments.
The top is an apartment, the bottom is an Airbnb. It's actually for sale as an investment property if you want to buy it.
Okay, hands up who's in real estate?
Yes.
Dan's not a realtor, don't say
I'm
that.
not a realtor, but
You move in and out of that community, right? Yeah. So, if you want to buy the Catro carriage house, any idea what it's going for?
It's cash only.
160. It's cash only.
How much?
160.
Come on, we can pool our money
It
today.
needs a lot of work, I think.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what
Oh,
kind
so
of
it's
state
it's a
in.
fixer-upper
It's an
carriage
investment.
house.
Yeah.
Property.
And there's a tenant. You have to keep the tenant.
Yeah, you have to keep
They're
the
on a
tenant.
lease, yeah.
Man,
You can't.
We're trying to buy it. I think it'd be so fun.
there are a lot of provisos in that deal. So let's.
Yeah.
Towards
Okay.
my offer.
Who's in?
Where Our Lady of Good Hope is, the First Catholic Church was St. Michael's, which was down on South Main Street. Our Lady of Good Hope was here, and this is the site of the Kircher School from many years ago. Now, of course, it's the Catholic Church, and this will be one of the stops, fingers crossed, on our historic churches in Miamisburg, because I would really like to see that stained glass on the inside. Any questions about North Miamisburg? Anything at all?
There is a bank, around here. What bank was that? You can still see that it says that's.
Oh, the savings and loan?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was the mutual savings and loan for many years.
okay.
Originally, that property was where the Miami Township, there's the loud car, I promise. The Miami Township offices used to be there. And then it became a savings and loan later on. And then the vault is still there, and it's had a number of restaurants in there, and all the restaurants have had different problems staying in business, and hopefully the next one will be successful, because it's a really neat building. It could be an event space, it could be, I don't know, Airbnb in the vault. What do you think?
There needs to be something.
As long as you don't have to keep the original tenant or anything like that. Any questions at all? Wednesdays and Saturdays from 1 to 4. But if you have a group that's coming into town, or just a group of friends, let us know and we'll open it up for you. And it is diagonal from where we are right now. And as you can see, Miamisburg put all of the veterans banners in the park, so you can park your car, you can walk through our beautiful park, and you can actually read everything and see the picture without doing one of these while you're driving. And we had such a response to this that you can see once you're over there. Happen to know it's there, but we put another 20 banners on the building because we sold so many of those in the first year that we ran out of light poles in our park. So again, when we're talking about having a Veterans Memorial in the park with all those banners that we're rotating out every year, some of them are inside the History Center, some of them are in the park. Every year they rotate. So we definitely love our veterans here in Miamisburg.
Let me get this straight. You said when the architects are coming, so you're gonna build a whole new building for that?
Oh, no.
Or is
We're
that
gonna-
added on?
We just want to make sure that we go in there that, well, when the second library was built there, they took all the dirt and kind of patted it around the Carnegie building, and it's brick. It wasn't designed to hold water, so there's always been humidity problems in that building. So maybe we're going to be out there with shovels digging it all back out. I hope I'm not on that committee. But that may be one recommendation. We want to make sure that it's, the humidity is the right level, that we can keep the temperature consistent, that there isn't something in the attic that's going to, come through the plaster or something like that. Make sure everything is as sturdy as possible, that we can, if we can put display cases in there without affecting the floors, all that stuff. So the architects are coming in for really, what is it going to take to make it as structurally sound as possible. But as I said, the city's pretty excited about this. One, to have a tenant in that building, and two, that we're doing something important with it like we are. Okay, Paula, it's also chock full of ghosts.
See me for that.
So once we find out that the building is safe structurally, then we'll see if it's safe spiritually.
This on my Instagram. Oh, I can do scars.
Yeah. There we got a. There we gotta check them out. I ain't going. I don't know. Cool. Good deal. There we go. Volunteer. Here we go. There we go. To the two.